And I think everyone should have the same drive. If you're able to tell a story and you know these stories of the faith, it is your duty to tell that story. Because if you didn't, then these stories might die. And that's where you have things like people specifically, like Abba Pavnotius, like was led by the Spirit specifically to go in the desert, take down and write down the stories of the saints. And that's how we know the story of Abba Nofer, the anchorite. So it's like, if these people who are writers, like let's not view them in that shell of a saint, who are writers, painters, artists, the ones who painted the walls and frescoes in the monasteries, if these people chose not to tell stories, we would have had a huge gaps in our tradition, huge gaps in the beautiful tapestry that is Coptic Orthodoxy. And so that's the way that I view it. I don't so much view it as, there's social media, let's do something cool there, let's have an account, let's run it, let's make pictures. I just view it as the church itself and our faith is story. And if I can, and I love this stuff, and I enjoy it, that's my hobby, I will tell these stories.
Hello everyone, this is Father Paul, and I hope you're having a good day. You're listening to Copts in Conversation.
Alright, so today I have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Elgamal. And if you don't know this young man, he is a Coptic Orthodox writer and artist. And before I tell you his big project, let me tell you that he published picture books for children, graphic novels for all ages. And one of his most recent works is Anastasis and the Life of St. John the Short. If you haven't guessed by now, yes, it's Michael from Creative Orthodox. And under Creative Orthodox, he published Anastasis and the Life of St. John the Short and other visual works such as Ascent, a documentary on St. Anthony the Great. He lives in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, with his wife, Marjorie, and 2 children. So thank you for being here, Michael. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And, like digital media meets the Orthodox faith and, bringing them both together. How did all this come about?
First of all, thank you so much, Abuna, for having me. It is a pleasure, and I love that we can have these conversations and have these projects so near to home. It was an hour drive for me, so it's so encouraging that so much is happening in this area, art and media wise. Yes. And as far as when Creative Orthodox and how Creative Orthodox started, it was actually from a negative experience. So it was I was let go out of my first job out of university. So I have a marketing background, so it was an entry-level marketing position. And I was let go from that first role, and it took me a very long time to find a job, around a year and a half. And so unemployment, it's a tougher cross to bear, mentally more so, where the day-to-day starts blending. You stop having reason to wake up early. You stop having reasons to have discipline,
right?
And things start meshing together, and you can very easily lose your way and lose focus. And so at the time, I wanted something to keep me disciplined, to give me a schedule, to have a job other than applying for jobs. And so I wanted to. I've been drawing all my life, so I said, okay, and I love comics, so I said I'll start drawing comics, and I actually wanted to start with one of my favorite saints, St. Anthony the Great. And then I got to drawing, and one of my closest friends, Abuna Anthony Paul, I would take to him the drawing, and I'd be like, here are some sketches. He's like, la, damish ab. No, that's not St. Anthony. It doesn't look like him. And so I realized that, okay, maybe not my first project out the gate. I'll be able to get this right. And I can't get it right unless Abuna Anthony felt like it's close to the saint.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, let's do the second, let's do another one of the great saints. And I found that St. John the Short had an awesome, thorough translation of the manuscript. We have his entire life translated, and so there's a lot to
work with.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I started doing that. And then over 6 years, I was drawing day in, day out. Obviously found a job year and a half in, but continued doing so. And while I was working on the book, I started illustrating saints on the Orthodox calendar year. So whenever a feast day comes, I would illustrate that saint.
You would release that?
Exactly. Yes. And so over the years, it just built up from there, and then got into anastasis, and it sort of just became a creative outlet for me, and to a lesser extent, from my personal a service. But it's just I've my entire life I've been telling stories, and so I kind of very naturally fell into Creative Orthodox.
And it's interesting that you're coming from a marketing background. I thought for sure like you would have some sort of artistic training or training in the arts or digital media, even something. But coming from marketing, how did that help?
So marketing is actually storytelling. So that's why, and I would say this about most projects and things that I make. It's actually stronger from a storytelling perspective than the artistic and the technical standpoint. And so in everything I do, even at work, I live and die by story. From marketing, to grow in marketing, you have to know your audience. You have to know what you're trying to say, the concise message that you're trying to deliver. And it's the same thing. And God has sort of worked with me in this way in my life, where the things that I need to learn to help me with my projects or service or help me grow end up working their way into all aspects of my life. And so when at a time where I need to get into filmmaking, I would get a project at work to start going and shooting commercials. At a time where I would need to start getting into audio, same thing at work. And so and vice versa. So things that I would do for Creative Orthodox help me go further in my career. So it was sort of this mutually beneficial relationship between my work and other aspects of my life and Creative Orthodox.
Very nice. And the challenges of trying to find work and all that stuff, to be able to channel all of that creative energy into something like this. You channeled it into the faith and produced something and created something that's truly remarkable and unique. I don't know if any other illustrator or digital media creator out there that's Orthodox and creating, at least Coptic Orthodox, and creating similar things. And it's amazing. And my question is, like, with all of the things that the church does, where does digital media fit into the grand scheme of things? I mean, I know a lot of people who have artistic ability, and they usually tend to go into the route of iconography.
So I'll sidestep your question to frame my answer. I actually think this storytelling is in the fabric of the church. Let's take 20 steps back. Actually, I actually think storytelling is every human's way of communicating, disseminating information, and building, passing down culture and tradition. So that's just the natural human way of communicating. But I actually think specifically story and narrative is a way of action, a way that the Holy Spirit takes action in our lives. Christ could have used any way of communicating, but he chose story, he chose parables. I actually think this is fascinating. In stories of a lot of the saints, you have the Spirit guiding someone specifically to get the story. In the life of Saint Mary of Egypt, Abba Zosimus, specifically, all he did in her life was, he gave him communion, so there's that. But all he did in her life is led by the Spirit to get her story down. And that was it. That was the end of their interaction. And so even when you take a look at the life of St. John the Short, it was written by a Saint Zechariah of Secha. And he was just a well-learned man, a rarity at the time. He worked for the government because he knew how to read and write. And he was called by the Spirit to become a monk. And then the monks passed down the story of St. John the Short. And that's how we have his story today. And so I feel like that's one explicit thread when it comes to storytelling. The church itself we have the institution narrative every liturgy. So story permeates every aspect of our faith, and I feel like the Holy Spirit uses story to bring us closer to God. And so when I think of Creative Orthodox, I don't just think of it as a way of digital media. I almost feel compelled to, and I think everyone should have the same drive. If you're able to tell a story and you know these stories of the faith, it is your duty to tell that story. Because if you didn't, then these stories might die. And that's where you have things like people specifically, like Abba Pavnotius, like was led by the Spirit specifically to go in the desert, take down and write down the stories of the saints. And that's how we know the story of Abba Nofer, the anchorite. So it's like, if these people who are writers, like let's not view them in that shell of a saint, who are writers, painters, artists, the ones who painted the walls and frescoes in the monasteries, if these people chose not to tell stories, we would have had a huge gaps in our tradition, huge gaps in the beautiful tapestry that is Coptic Orthodoxy. And so that's the way that I view it. I don't so much view it as, there's social media, let's do something cool there, let's have an account, let's run it, let's make pictures. I just view it as the church itself and our faith is story. And if I can, and I love this stuff and I enjoy it, that's my hobby, I will tell these stories.
Right. And it's a way of bringing us into that grander story, the story of salvation.
Yep.
Right. And I love, of course, how you mentioned how that common element in many of the saints' stories about someone's only role in the story is to go get the story. Like Saint Julius al-Aqfasi, who is the biographer of the saints, who's, every time he appears in a story, his role is to go get the story, just to write down what happened, right? And to witness for that, to provide that witness and to say, this is what happened, right? And it's not just as a way of documenting history. There's a purpose to it, right? Like, it's hagiography. It's bringing us into the story. It's pushing us forward towards something, towards holiness, towards righteousness, right? So it's not like you're saying, it's not just digital media for its own sake.
Yep.
I love how all your work, there's a purpose behind it. It's something that draws you in. Whenever, you see one of those paintings, drawings for one of the saints, illustrations. Thank you. So whenever you see one of those illustrations for one of the feasts of the church, one of the saints, it's like it draws you into the story of the saint. It's not just about reminding us, today is the feast of Saint Anthony, or today is the feast of Saint Moses.
Yep.
It draws you into a story, into the life of the saint.
Yeah, and so two points here that I want to bring forward, and you remind me of that. I'm actually very careful not calling any of the work I do icons. I'm actually relatively inconsistent with this, but sometimes I make the decision to not have a halo, to purposefully say, this is not an icon, this is not an object of prayer. Sometimes I add the halo. It's inconsistent, but the times that I do ignore it is because that's on my mind, and I am not illustrating within the trained and the incredible tradition of iconography. It's story. It actually is story. And that's also an extension of how I was raised. I immigrated to Canada when I was 14 years old. And so in Egypt, I have really fond memories of my Geddo Moheb. He would, he lived in Shobra, we lived in Maadi, and he would bring, after he would come visit us in our home over the weekend. He will go to a liturgy and he would come back. And I remember he comes back and I'd be very excited because he gets a full Orban from the Hamal. So I'd be really excited for the full Orban.
Of course.
And then he would come in, we'd go into a room, and he had a brown briefcase. I remember it vividly. And the briefcase, the plastic, and had like a leather texture to it. He would sit down very slowly, very carefully, open it up. And he would like, so the back of the briefcase is to me. So I can't see what he's picking up. And so it was very exciting for me. And he would take out pictures of the saints that he picked up at the bookstore. And every week he would do this. He would go get different pictures, pick them up, and would bring them. And every time he would pass them to me, tell me their story, and would go from there. At the same time, my teta's brother was a monk at Dire Surien, so Abuna Personofius. And then whenever he would have any medical procedures to do in the city, he would come, he would visit, and he would always sit us down, and he would start telling these stories. And whoever remembers details of the story, he would give them a picture of the same from his pocket. And I didn't realize this at the time. And the things that he was giving away was the things that he had collected along the visit, so he can go back to the monastery empty pockets.
The same way he left.
Exactly. So he would visit people, accumulate things, and then as he asks questions, he just gives them back as he's moving. And so I was raised on story in this way, and that's why that's sort of the place that I operate in. Not iconography. I feel like this is its own pillar in our tradition, but there's also the aspect of story that is a very big part of why such a small collection of persecuted people in Egypt made it over the centuries.
Because the story.
Because they told their story.
Yeah. And so I would assume you would see yourself as a storyteller.
Yep.
More
Absolutely.
than anything else.
Absolutely.
You're a storyteller. And this happens to be your vehicle, your medium, the way you're telling the story.
And it's actually probably frustrating for anyone who follows my work if they had liked one thing or another, because I keep switching the mode. Like I did graphic novels, and then I switched to coloring books and picture books for children, then switched to the documentary, so a bit of filmmaking, and then switched into the audio drama, pure audio. And actually in Kitchener several years ago, we made a dinner, and it was the story of salvation told through the meals. So we would have we every course, it was a 9-course dinner, and every one is part of the story of salvation. It was the Garden of Eden was a garden salad as an appetizer, and then we had the ark as first soup, but without the water, and then servers would go around and drown the soup, and so it kept going. And then we were very careful in the application. I'm giving a very blunt summary of it, but then it comes to the sacrifice and resurrection being a dessert, so it's a sweetness. We actually had in the fall, we had a salad, and in it we had very bitter flavors, so the person would start getting into it, and then all of a sudden they start tasting like the apple, but then also and fruit, and then they would start tasting bitterness. So I don't stick with one vehicle just because it's whatever I'm into at the time, whatever mode tells the story the best. It usually starts with what story am I trying to tell, and then it sort of dictates what the vehicle is. But yeah, it must be frustrating for someone who likes one thing and is expecting more of it.
And someone who's following your work, and then to see like, okay, now he's switching lanes.
Yep.
He's still telling a story, but he's doing something else with it. I love how you're doing it with food even. That's amazing. Was this something at your home or at church?
It was at church.
Friends?
It was at church.
Yeah.
And we actually, I mean, there's so much involved with it, but we actually wanted to expand it to the neighboring churches in the GTA as well. And then we also explored, well, what if we go to churches, use their kitchens, and tell the story there? So there's a lot of unexplored territory there for that project specifically. But yeah.
And speaking of influences, you mentioned your grandfather and your uncle, correct?
My teta's brother.
Teta's brother. Both of these were in Egypt.
Yep.
When you immigrated, you came here 14 years old, around that time.
Yep.
So what kind of things influenced your thinking as you went through the high school, university kind of years?
To a very large degree, it was a combination of it continued being my grandfather until the end of high school when he and then my father, he is very well learned in theology, so our home is riddled. My parents' home is riddled with books on theology and such, and him and I have a very funny way of communicating where if I even express a secondary thought of a question about the faith that I have, he wouldn't sit me down and start explaining it to me, because that's not how either of us kind of think and approach it. I would start seeing trickles of these books appearing all around me, stacks of these books appearing around me. And so it's a very fun way of communicating, where if I have a project, I just, and from watching him, he's been writing for, I think for 20 plus years, for a publication in Egypt, Maktabt al-Mahabba. So I would see him sit down with these books, preparing, writing. In Egypt, he wrote plays. So that sort of space, in a way, I was just echoing what I saw my father do. And then the other huge influence was Father Anthony Paul, where he was part of our close friends group, and all together we saw his love for Saint Anthony, and all of that, all of us converged on that love, so much so that it became a fabric of who we are as people. Whenever he had a feast, we would have a cake. A cake for Ava Anthony, as his Pinishti Ava Antoni, and then we'd read his life and do Tasbih the night before. It became a non-negotiable for us as a group of friends, and so that was another huge influence on me, and that's why I sort of gravitated to this place I'm in with the Desert Fathers and patristics and such.
And I noticed that in your work, Desert Fathers occupy a large portion. Like, it's mostly Desert Fathers.
Yeah.
And you focus so much on their lives. And it started with Saint Anthony.
Yeah.
And then it went, to other Desert Fathers. So what's your preparation process like?
So this is the part where I take a step back and I notice that the things that I'm making are the things that I would have loved to consume when I was younger. I loved comics. I still love comics. I grew up on both Disney superheroes, love Batman, all of these things. Lord of the Rings, like these things are the way that I find that I interpret and find meaning in life, or find life's meaning, kind of thing. And so when it comes to illustrating the life of a saint or researching the life of a saint, usually I start with the church calendar, because again, the church is such an amazing storyteller. Throughout the year, the way that the saints, the way that the different saints are interwoven in what the church is celebrating now, even the way that when it comes to Holy Week, we change the curtains to black, to white. Like there's this incredible narrative throughout the year that the church, that is right in front of our eyes, but is really easy to kind of miss. And so that's usually where I start, where it's like, what's coming up, what's a feast day that's coming up. From there, usually take a look at the Synaxarium. Most often, the Synaxarium is usually doesn't have a lot of detail, doesn't have a lot of historical grounding. And so then I'd start taking a look at manuscripts. I'd start looking at the translations, works by Tim Vivian, Deacon Severus Michael. There's so much out there, and this is where younger me would have been so thankful. It's just reading these things is tough. You're reading something. I experienced this when drawing the life of Saint John the Short. The manuscript is not written how we interpret stories today. Obviously, it was in the 4th century. It's written as more like a mosaic of like Saint John did this, Saint John did this, and he did this, and then did this, and then he died. Let us emulate him. And that's the way that they consumed story back then. It's changed. Right now, we have a very tight way of story, whereas someone woke up, something changed the way their day to day. They went on an adventure. They refused the adventure. They decided to take it on. They grew. They fought. There was a darkest night. They chose to overcome. And then they changed and they became a different person. And rinse and repeat, that's just the story cycle. And so when you take that and you apply it to a manuscript, you see that it's a very different way of telling the story. And so that's, I think, where the bulk of my work goes into. It's, let's look at the original text. Let's look at the translated text, the English or Arabic, and let's find a narrative in there and translate it to whatever medium that comes out of it.
Very nice. And obviously, it goes without saying that there's a lot of work, there's a lot of reading that goes into it, consuming everything that you can get your hands on, trying to get as much data, as much information. Is there someone that's kind of like a reference?
At the rate I go, I usually finish. It depends on big projects. I have a group of close friends and harsh critics, where I send the work and kind of get their feedback, and my parents as well, and my sister. If you want to know the pure opinion about anything in life, just ask your family.
Ask your family.
They will
not going to sugarcoat anything, right?
Absolutely. So I have a circle where I do send these things. The smaller stuff like the day to day, I sort of just get the small stories out there. But for bigger projects, absolutely. It's so easy to make mistakes, especially since there's so much about the faith. I'll give you an example. At some point, I was excited about representing an Orthodox family, and so I drew the Holy Family, and I was so excited about it. And I'm like, let's do this. Then I started getting the feedback that actually we don't really love illustrating Saint Joseph with Christ and Saint Mary because it doesn't communicate the true nature of Christ. So even though it's right, it's not. We don't really typically do it in this form. And so these subtle things, there's so much of it in all the stories of the saints, and so it is very easy to make a mistake. And that's why I have great respect for iconography, because it has these parameters. Where which a master or a master iconographer would teach those rules to a student, and so for lack of that, I will continue making these mistakes and trying to learn from it as I tell these stories.
And I think that's where you probably grow the most is from learning from, and as you know, as a modern person reading something from the 4th century, from the 7th century, like it's so hard to not read something into the story. Right? Like you want to read it this way because this is how you would react if you were there. If you were the person in the story, what would I do? Right? And it's very difficult to kind of read it on its own terms. And I love how you're able to do that and then present it in a way so that someone from the 21st century is able to read that and not misunderstand, not kind of read something into the story.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example, and I still struggle with this, and I struggle with my decision, but you make it, you move on. In the life of Saint John the Short, Abba Amoy, when he first sees him, Abba Amoy kicks him out after Saint John the Short made a 12-day journey to reach the monastery. And then Abba Amoy ignored him. He told him, you're not going to be a monk. You're not going to last a day. And then he kicked John out. John sat outside of his cell praying. And Abba Amoy every day, for weeks at a time, he would go out with branches, and he would beat St. John away from near his cell. Right. Every day, he opens the door of his cell, beats St. John. St. John goes and then comes back, continues praying. Until after that period of time, Abba Amoy went out and saw St. John praying, and then he's surrounded by 7 angels praying with him. And he was like, okay, wait a minute. But for me, when I made the graphic novel, I actually chose not to include that. And for better or for worse, I felt like from a narrative perspective, usually this is the point where you have that father figure come in, that sensei, that teacher, and you want to communicate to the reader how incredible they are, how much they're building the protagonist. And so at the point of making the book, I decided not to include that. I figured it paints Abba Amoy in a very harsh way, and exactly. And the modern reader might not see through that. They might say like, how are you teaching love when this is how you're welcoming someone who comes to your monastery? Right. And so I made the decision not to include it. I don't know. I still think about it sometimes. I think maybe, you're representing the part of discipline, the part of, it shows the seriousness of taking that vow of poverty and becoming a monk. I don't know if it was the right decision or wrong, but that's what I mean, is that there are so many chances to make these little decisions and cloud the story with my own interpretation.
Right.
But I think this must have happened in the same manuscript of the St. John the Short. There's a huge paragraph that goes on basically a rant, an anti-Chalcedonian rant, and it was obviously just the interpretation of Saint Zacharias. That's what was feeling at the time, and it's the same with On the Incarnation. You have Saint Athanasius communicating how Saint Anthony and he reacted towards the Arians. And so no matter what, whenever someone sits down to write a story, it obviously takes their own personal lens, and that's scary for me.
It's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. Right?
Exactly.
But we do have a lot of that. Like we have in the story of Saint Moses and the treatment he receives in the monastery. I mean, like, you know, it seems like, man, this must have been such a harsh thing, like to come in earnestly seeking God and then, you know, being put through all these tests and then still enduring. And you see this, like you hear stories about like Saint Shuda Ashmand, right? You hear stories, even about Saint Cyril of Alexandria, and you know, for the longest time in the West, he's vilified because you know, harshness of you know, it's so easy to fall into that mistake that, you know, as a modern, you're reading a lot into the story and not reading it necessarily on its own terms. And if you hear stories today, not stories from the 4th century, but today, you know, about monastic communities and how they function, and you know, the kind of seriousness that they approach monasticism, this is not something interpreted as like, you know, you have to be nice and polite, and you have to be like, these are people who are going out there to be tested to their limit, to face, you know, the spiritual battle at its harshest, right? They're not there, you know, to be coddled. They're there to be tested, and that's why they go there to be tested, right? I see also that you do focus a lot on earlier saints, but there are a few modern saints that you've included, like Father Saman Shahata. What was the motivation behind that? To kind of do an illustration for him.
It's still this line that I try to walk, where I called the platform or brand, whatever, Creative Orthodox, to be able to tell the stories of our saints and not offend people who might, for example, shun it just if it's called Coptic Orthodox, for example. I didn't call it like Creative Christian, for example, because I feel like there are so many artists that are and storytellers way better than I am telling those stories at that level. And so that's sort of why I focus on Creative Orthodox. And at the same time, I focus on early fathers because they are the ones that are common across Eastern and Oriental Orthodoxy. Right. So it's a good way to tell these stories of these incredible saints away from any preconceived notions, away from that
from drama. All the polemics and all the
exactly. And sort of do that one work telling that story and serve a bigger portion of Christians. On the other hand, when I think an advantage of social media is the speed with which it goes. I think an iconographer would write an incredible icon for these martyrs, but it might take a week, it might take a month. And so something that I feel is within my realm, the limits of my service is when there's a modern martyr, I like to illustrate a picture. So the picture of them, if there's a picture of them be bloody, like from the investigation, from whatever, I wouldn't want that to be the thing. You wouldn't feel comfortable sharing it with your kids, for example. So I usually do it under the guise of let's put something quick together, simple, but an image to put them in context with the rest of the cloud of witnesses. Right. Like these same saints that I'm drawing, the church hasn't stopped. It's still going, and we're still telling these stories and adding them to the same the same larger picture and the same cloud of witnesses that we have. And so that's the main reason why I tend to illustrate also modern saints to kind of tell that story of it's still going. It didn't stop in the 4th century.
We're bringing people into that reality that we're still the church, or still the cloud of witnesses is growing.
Exactly. But at the same time, I usually have the same challenges that we just talked about. I try to pause, investigate, look into it, how did the martyr die? Is it verified by the church? Like all of these things, I don't want to rush, just because of how fast things may go, how fast news can go, and falsehoods can go around.
Of course.
So I don't like it too much. That part, how quick these things
It's like
may
a double-edged
go.
sword.
Exactly. So sometimes you'll notice that sometimes I would have forgone drawing a person or another just because I just wasn't comfortable with the whole thing. But if the church came out and identified them as a martyr, I love to have this thing to share with children that is not graphic or scary.
Right. And you mentioned how we used to give out pictures in Sunday school. I missed that. Like growing up, I used to get all these pictures and go home with all of them. But I don't know if we do that anymore. I don't think we do much of those.
I don't think so. And if we do it, it's like it's from an ancient. Like we have this stack that we haven't.
We do, yeah.
It's not a new.
We don't make any new ones. We just use the ones we already have because everything is going digital now.
Yep.
So, did you ever consider doing something that's not digital, like taking it and maybe doing something in print?
Absolutely, and that's why I also started exploring carving recently. There's a fleeting quality of digital like drawing with pixels, and so recently I've started exploring carving or ing ink prints. So to carve a block and then you put ink on it, and then you put the paper, so you produce something tangible, something you're able to hold. With this stuff, I have logistical limitations, as in I do everything related to Creative Orthodox, and so when it comes to shipping, when it comes to store setup and all of these things, finding good rates, and again, being an individual rather than a company,
you're the only
things are expensive.
Employee in the whole company.
Exactly. I'm HR.
All of them.
Yeah, R&D, everything.
Marketing.
Exactly. You're meeting the whole team right now. But it's harder for me to find economies of scale and make it available at a good rate. And so I try as much as possible to make the books available cheaply, accessible and such. But at the end of the day, nothing is as easy as here is a $2 PDF. Here is this thing.
Exactly.
You can,
It's just so much easier to do it digitally, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One of your illustrations for Saint Anthony, the way you had the light focus in, and then like everything else is darkness, and Saint Anthony, and then all the demons are in the periphery, and then Saint Anthony's in the middle, and there's light. How were you able to make that happen and do that without formal training in this kind of thing? Is this doable? Like if someone has the passion, if someone would like to be a storyteller and go into these kinds of illustrations, how doable is this?
It is so incredibly accessible, and I think I'm the best example because my drawing is, and I say this with all objectivity, it is so bad. It is a child's drawing. If you actually see, I have a sketch of St. Paul that I did when I was very young. My mother usually, my parents always encouraged me to keep drawing and draw comics and such, and so my mom kept this. I believe I was 4 years old, but it must have been a bit after. But anyways, it was St. Paul, and it was drawing. It looks exactly as how I would draw him today. I haven't changed one bit. And so but what is encouraging to me, so that's one thing. I mean, I don't think I'm particularly good at illustration, but what is encouraging to me is that and it brings me even a little bit of pride, is that when I look at the frescoes in St. Anthony's, in Bawit, when I look at all of these wall paintings, they look the same. It's not, I mean, obviously there's so much more artistry that goes into putting a fresco on a wall, mixing the colors and painting them. But the line work is simple. It is a nice, unobstructed, childish look at the story. It is simple. And that's what I love about the old Coptic art, is that it is so deep but so accessible. And so anyone can sit down and draw. And there are so many tutorials online now. It is so accessible. You can get a drawing tablet for, I don't know, $70, and that's it. That you're after. You don't even need a drawing tablet. You can draw, scan, take a picture, and that's it. And so when it comes to that, I think the beginning is really easy, and then knowing how to tell the story that you're trying to tell. This comes from practice. You'll see that I've drawn some things where I take a step back and I say, okay, the eye isn't going to the saint first. Something needs to change there. From us growing, looking at iconography, all of that, it must be entrenched in us to be able to. It's a language, and I think that our church is really good at teaching us that language. And so I think anyone who is familiar with that imagery were to sit down and start drawing and practice a little bit, with time they'll easily, I mean, very quickly they'll draw better than I draw, and then with time they can even start exploring iconography wherever their heart goes. And then you can get into the formal artistic areas where when you draw something, you make it black and white. You take a look at what these gradients are telling you, what story these gradients are saying, what's coming out, what's falling in the back. And so right now my general process for creative work, and I apply this to film, I apply this to scripts, I apply this to any media, is doing different like finishing the work very quickly, don't edit too much, and then just staying in editing and doing many passes of, did I make any theological mistake? Is this out of the ordinary? Are the colors telling the right story, like color temperature and such? Is the picture, or am I emphasizing the elements I want to emphasize? That sort of thing. And then just taking all these different passes of editing, and it's so much easier at that point, because you're not in the mode of like creative expression and focusing on drawing. At that point, you're just looking at it as any other, as any disconnected audience member. And so you can take a look at it and say, okay, this is right, this is wrong. And you do it separately. You do a pass for color, do a pass for values, do a pass for the line work. And so it becomes easy that way when you break it down into those different phases.
And this process developed obviously over time,
Absolutely.
Trial and error. And it's amazing how simple the drawings are, but they speak a lot, they say a lot, and they really do effectively draw you into that story. And it's every time I look at part of the illustration, I'm like, I can draw that. Like I and that's it's deceptively simple. Like I can and then yet at the same time, all these elements work so well together to really bring you into that, and an illustration itself doesn't become kind of like an obstacle. It draws you deeper than the actual illustration, right? And it definitely helps to look at it with the liturgical, liturgically our senses are being trained, and for someone to start doing this kind of thing, like you're not starting from scratch. Like you've been churched. You've been in a church, you're born and raised, and your eyes, your ears, your senses, are being focused towards this. So when you approach this, does it speak a lot, right? And the choice of colors, all of that, like the composition, it's just beautiful. And I do want to get into your big work, Anastasis, but before, I also want to ask if you consider doing something contemporary, using the same, same techniques, your same kind of visual. Have you considered doing something like that?
Absolutely. So one, I'm still trying to figure out how to tell that story, is the story of St. Moses, the strong scene in a contemporary, present day context. And I think for this one specifically, it's so easy when we talk about the saints. I mean, it's kind of the other side of what we were just talking about, where you don't think of them as, this could be my dad, this could be my uncle, this could be someone, an elder at church. You just see them wearing their tunics, their big crosses, the halos. You separate yourself from them. And even more so for the saints that their writers made sure to say they were born praying. They were, since a very young age, they loved God. And so I think the strength of the story of St. Moses is that he didn't. And we have enough detail. We have other examples, but we have enough detail in the life of St. Moses to know what he did before he started turning
He
towards
was definitely
God.
a sinner before he became a saint.
Yeah, and he would have done things way worse than most of us would. Not that matters, but it's just it's a good example. It's sincerely a good, relatable example. And so I'm really passionate about, and I've had this idea for about 7 years, where to tell his story in present day, showing him struggling with drugs, with gang activity, stealing, with lust, and the things that are like pornography as it's ravaging the young, the younger young people these days. And so showing him going through that, and showing how he turned to God.
Right.
And so again, there are logistical limitations that I have there. I've always envisioned it as a film, and I know that actually a filmmaker from the Eastern Church started making a film exactly the same way of the same story as told in Chicago. And so I think this is another thing, and kind of goes to what at the beginning of our conversation. The Spirit finds a way to tell the story,
Right.
And so that's one way. The story is still on my heart, and it's been in my mind for a long time. So I think I wanted to start exploring telling it in other formats, maybe audio. So that's one idea. But another one that I'm really passionate about, we've actually made it as a film for our church's kids camp years ago. It's called The Keepers of the Word, and the story is in a dystopian future where all the big companies and the governments merged into one entity. And in order to avoid fake news and all of these things, anything that is not scientifically proven is purged, and information is disseminated from one governing body of the world. And so sort of taking all our present day scenarios and kind of taking them to a caricaturized extreme, and then showing how Christianity lived at that time, or how it survived. And the way that I'm structuring it, it actually mirrors early Christianity's rise in the Roman Empire. And so it's it follows this group of Christians that identified the last remaining Bible months before it gets purged, and then all of Christianity, because it can't be proven. So it's part of that thing that is getting purged,
Outlawed.
Yeah, exactly. And their story for how to revive the word, and how does this group of people live in this hostile environment? How are they living their faith, and how are they containing their tradition? And the bottom line that I'm hoping of, currently I'm doing it as a graphic novel. The bottom line that I'm hoping to communicate with that work is, if you are not taking specific actions today to learn your faith, tell the story of your faith and live out your faith explicitly, and not compartmentalize it in just your weekend or such, then the faith is at a risk. But more so, your life and your spiritual life is at risk, and there are implications for our children and the future of the church.
So when you say that you wanted to do a film, and you mentioned doing some audio, what was it? How's the transition from just like a digital illustration, now you're putting in audio, you're adding another dimension?
Yeah, so the transition between one medium to another is not hard, in the way that if you have the core story, doesn't matter what you can do interpretive dance. You're telling, if you have the story down, you
could, but probably shouldn't.
You could, but shouldn't, and it's not something that I'd be particularly good at.
Would that be something maybe down the line?
No, I don't think that's something we're going to explore.
We're roll it out.
Sure. Yeah, but the core of the story is there. Then it's easy to tell that same thing in whatever format. The hard work comes into actually sitting down, writing that script, or drawing the day-to-day. A lot of making these things come together comes in like showing up every day, and it's really hard to carve out that time. And even now, more so that I have a baby daughter, it's hard, and I have to be purposeful. And at times, actually, at the end of every project, and you can ask my wife, my entire family actively sacrifices to get these things out the door. So when there is a release, I start sleeping later. I can't help in the morning, so my wife has to do more. My son has to, forego an activity or two. All of us have to sacrifice to kind of put that thing, get that project to an end. And so I think the hard part isn't actually in taking a story and telling it in different formats. I think the hard part is show up and do that every day. And to me, oddly enough, like I feel like the content actually helps me get through it, where in some of the fathers, it's just water the tree, show up and water the dead stick, like as in Abba John's life.
Saint John,
And so I think a lot of these things, it's not about the grand, what's the great idea. Ideas are easy, ideas are quick, ideas come all the time. It's like, are you watering that dead stick without really, without having anything to show for it for 6 years, for 2 years, for whatever, how long a project takes? Are you showing up and doing that little bit of work to move it forward, kind of thing?
And having family with young children, it must be difficult, of course, to find that time and motivation. Any sort of time you're conflicted, like, do I spend time on this or with the kids? And how much of this is for the people within the church, and how much of it is consumed by people who are just like maybe seekers, or people who are just getting exposed to the Orthodox faith? Have you seen your work being used this way? Have you considered your work being as a sort of like a missionary tool, or something used in like missionary efforts?
Absolutely, and people have reached out in that capacity and such. I try not to think about it. It is so easy, especially in the realm of social media, to first of all harm a ton of people, but harm myself. Like it's so easy to just obsess about the wrong things. And I have at times, and that's why I try to put guardrails for myself to kind of just stay within the realm of just tell the story and nothing else matters. From how many people are watching this, the funnier stuff gets a lot more engagement, I should do more funny stuff. People like this but don't really like that, I should do more of this than that. I should do more for converts rather than believers. I try not to think about any of that. Sometimes it screams at me, and I it's just a very dangerous place. It's also why I try not to use my first name, last name, so I don't trick myself into thinking that it's the person. So I try to separate myself from the platform. And it's funny, sometimes people come after me, it's like, you're being subversive on purpose, like, why are you hiding? I was just like, I'm trying to separate myself from it.
Some sort of conspiracy theory. He's putting this stuff out there, but
exactly. But I try as much as possible not to let myself get distracted with all of the things that an ego can feed off of on social media. So I don't think about it much, but I know for sure that the saints are the saints. The Saint Anthony is going to continue drawing millions of people over the ages. It's Saint Anthony. His story. It's so funny. Right when you start looking into the history of Abba Anthony and how it started with Saint Athanasius writing the story in the early late 3rd century, and it caught like wildfire. Went to Europe and they did the Golden Legend, caught like wildfire. You see Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine reads it and says, "I am compelled." He uses the same words that we use today. That myself and my group of friends, we felt the same way. Like, you read Saint Augustine's reading of it, and that was shortly after. Same thing, and it doesn't matter. Ever since then till today, the same story. Someone reads it, oh my God. What is in that story? It's a story like any other story, but for some reason, this one stayed centuries. This Egyptian peasant in the middle of nowhere. There is no reason why we should be talking about him today, but we are. And so that's why I think it's not really about the vehicle. It's the content. It's the content. The content itself is Saint Anthony, Saint Moses the Strong, Saint Mary of Egypt.
And I see the same thing with Saint Macarius the Great in the intro to the 50 spiritual homilies about how his impact in post-Reformation West is great, to the extent that there are some pastors who have memorized large chunks of these. And again, like in your mind, you think like, what does East have to do with West? What does city have to do with desert? But the connection is there, and it's deep. It's much deeper, than just the words. It's in a connection in the heart, essentially, and it draws people in. But I wonder if the elements you draw on obviously come from your own background, from your own tradition, growing up in the Coptic Orthodox Church. Have you considered doing something, drawing on a different tradition, elements from like South America, from a different culture, essentially to do the same illustrations, to tell the same story, right?
It has, absolutely. I've illustrated saints like Saint Olga of Alaska, who was recently canonized in the Eastern Church.
Yeah.
Saints like Saint Morwena, who is a European saint. So I absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I just feel, who's going to tell their story?
Right.
Who's going to tell the story of the Copts?
Right.
And I feel such allegiance to the father of my father's father.
Right.
I feel like for this like small population of people, again, that lived centuries ago, have been persecuted their entire life, our iconography completely wiped out under that persecution, manuscripts gone with the different raids. Who's gonna tell our story? But at the same time, again, if like in terms of the content that I choose to do, I go to the early centuries. If not, then if there's a recent Orthodox saint that their life touches my own, and I find that they fit within the paradigm of our beliefs and our church, absolutely. Like there's no hard line in that way. And again, I do see an advantage to what I do is being outside of the paradigm of iconography for good reason. I mean, iconographers are great at what they do, and they're necessary and incredible for that specific place they fulfill. The same thing with me in terms of those light illustration, accessible, and it can veer on more contemporary saints, older saints. It's a more nimble format, and so I do play. If I feel like there's a story that needs telling there, and a role for me to play, I absolutely
more nimble.
explore.
There's more flexibility with your medium, right? So now let's move into your magnus opum, your Anastasis. How did that come about?
This was actually a 2-month project.
2 months, wow.
Yeah, and it was so fast that published before St. John the Short, where it was just a year before the 6th year, like the 6th year where I finished that work. The story I was told years and years ago by a dear friend of mine, who told me this story of a play she saw in Egypt, and I promised her and I promised her husband I will illustrate this story. And then she passed away from cancer. And then years and years later into Creative Orthodox, it started gnawing at me. And so I got together with her husband, Deacon John, and he managed to whip me into shape within 2 months to do it. It was this collaborative flowing work every night, sending drawings and then getting feedback, the script, and it was a very, like, I think we hit kind of a state of flow for the 2 months, and then out came that work. But that story is the story of stories. We can talk for hours about just that story. It's funny because some people look at the Descent and think, oh, this is just copying the same story that are in other cultures, with Osiris, the god of the dead, and how he goes with Eurydice from the Greek, where Orpheus goes into the dead and brings her back.
Right.
Every culture has this, but what people aren't seeing is that every culture is trying and straining to tell the story of Christ's descent into Hades. And even when you take a look at narrative, the hero's journey, it is that story. There's not whenever I encounter the story of Christ's descent into Hades from at even a slightly different angle, I get overtaken with so much emotion at how powerful that story is. It's yeah, and I love Sam McCarry's commentary on it, where he says, when you read the story of the descent, don't think that this is a tale that happened thousands of years ago. Christ is descending into your heart if you let him, and he will harrow the Hades of your heart. And that, to me, again, like, you can experience the story as this as the story that transcends culture. It is all of humanity. It includes the patriarchs. And then you pause and you start looking at what the church is trying to tell you, and you're like, wait a minute. Hades is my heart.
Right.
The darkness that I'm in is me, and Christ comes into that darkness and raises and extends his hand, and I grasp it. And it's funny, I do come bearing gifts. I brought you one of the
that's beautiful.
The Prince of Saint Anthony, and that was the summation of the documentary work on Saint Anthony. But for me, thinking of the story of Anthony being actually beaten by the demons, and him at his lowest point, it tells you that he started seeing Christ as a light, and then he had that moment. And to me, it's exactly that moment of anastasis. He's experiencing Christ's descent into Hades, and Christ raises him like Adam. And to me, that moment of Christ raising the fallen like Adam is a big point of spiritual transformation.
Right.
And so I think that's, again, the personal part of it. The part that really hits home for me is that the human heart and how.
And Sam McCarry's is all about the heart. The heart is where everything happens. The dragons are there, the angels are there, the fights are there, everything is happening in the heart. Right? And to speak to the flexibility of your medium, like, this motif is applied like perfectly with Saint Anthony. We only see this, in iconography with Adam and Eve, and how you use that and applied it and took it and incorporated it in the story of Saint Anthony, right? And at the same time, Saint Macarius's words are like, the whole universe is in our heart, right? Like, we're on the microcosm, like everything is happening there. And it doesn't take away from the story that all of these things happen on a different level, but at the same time, they're still happening in your heart. That Christ is descending into the depth of your heart and raising, your dead soul from the depth of Hades, from the chains, and setting you free, and then breaking down all those chains. So, Anastasis. It's a beautiful story, beautifully illustrated. There's different kinds of illustrations. There are things there that are, like conversational, and then you go into like different kinds of illustrations. How did you bring all this together?
Yeah, so it started with the manuscript. This one is chiefly from the Gospel of Nicodemus. Not to say that specific piece of work is 100% accepted and it's not 100% right. But the fact that it's there, and so many of our fathers corroborate the same language, the same story, it tells that there is a source for these things, that there is a very early tradition for that story. And so I had to be careful with adding visuals to that. I had to make a lot of decisions, even while the graphic novel 7 years ago was the start of it, but recently, a few months ago, I made it into an audio drama. And so even when we translated it to the audio format, we had to have really interesting questions around, okay, so Hades, are people in anguish? Are the good, is there is a separation between the good and the bad? Are the bad people being tortured? Do their spirits, are they feeling that torture? Do they walk around? Do they have so many questions that you now have to answer because you're putting it in a narrative format?
Right.
And there is, I'd say, the easy way out, which is kind of taking a look at all the interpretations by the European artists, the medieval artists. But there's so much noise that happened in these.
There's a lot of the imagination that goes into that, right?
Exactly. And the harrowing of Hades specifically, artists loved it because of how how vivid of a story it is, and it allows them to like do whatever they want.
License, just do,
Exactly.
be as imaginative, as creative as you can.
Absolutely.
Free.
You have Dante's Inferno,
Yes.
another piece of work structured around the story of the descent. But I had to be very careful.
Right.
I didn't want to put too much of an interpretation, and that's why actually I look back at that book and I see it kind of empty. Like when you look at behind, like in the back of the panels, the backgrounds, it's actually kind of sparse. Like I didn't really put too much form to Hades. In the audio format, tried to add a little bit with the screams and such to kind of paint a picture. Yeah. But generally, I was just very careful not to make assumptions. But then some of the fathers actually got creative with the story. You have Saint Ephraim, who has hilarious poems where the devil and death personified are having the conversation. And it's such a funny conversation where death is like, listen, I trusted you. Are you sure this isn't Jesus? And Satan is like, 100%. This is not Jesus. I saw him. I tempted him. He bleeds. There's no problem. And then death is like, Satan, you're easily tricked. And then Satan's like, death, you're a bit. You're just a brute. You're a blunt instrument. You're not cunning. And so this back and forth, and it's incredibly creative. And it's from one of the fathers. So I took that and then made it again both into the audio drama and the graphic novel. And so wherever I tried to put that to kind of illustrate that world, I tried not to veer too much from existing manuscripts and media.
You don't want to go too much into like speculative theology and go beyond.
Exactly.
Right. But again, like because of how you tell your story, the medium kind of affords you a bit of flexibility in how you tell it, and gives you the ability kind of to go and focus in as much as you want, or zoom out and put as much detail or as little as you want. And at the end of the day, the story is doing what it's supposed to do. Like it's drawing you in, it's taking you into into the events, right?
And the nature of that story too, it's kind of like the Avengers of biblical stories, except it's truth. But when you start hearing of what happened with these saints, what about the prophets? King David, he wrote the Psalms, he did this, he did that, he's in Hades.
Yeah.
And then what is he thinking? He wrote all of these things. They have prophecies. What are they thinking? And it's so incredible to think, we're sitting in darkness. We've been waiting for so many years, kind of like us living our life.
Yeah.
And we've been waiting, and we're not like God hasn't really come and appeared and whatever. Where's the salvation we were promised? We're in Hades. This is not how is this a loving God? And then someone comes and it's like, oh, I saw the Messiah. Another person comes, St. John the Forerunner. He was the forerunner on earth. He is the forerunner in Hades. Goes and he's like, there's one coming after me. And so taking these stories, it is actually like the Avengers. It has these incredible characters that we know and we grow up learning their stories, Moses, David, and then just thinking and trying to continue their story to say, okay, well, how are they dealing with this? And then, oh goodness, the moment where Christ goes down and descends into Hades, this place of darkness. And I love the way that our church, again, the church being an incredible storyteller, Christ trampling death by death, and for those in the tombs bestowing life. He shattered the iron gates, even both in the Eastern Church and how we do it as well, like the drama. But more so the patristic reflection of that story. It's such a strong, victorious reflection of the story of Christ, that I think it just takes that story and no matter how it's told, I think that tale kind of it really is the story of stories. But a little bit that I actually want to make obvious and bring to the forefront is I was careful to continue drawing Christ not just as a victor, but as a wounded Christ. And I even corrected that further in the audio drama where our mother Eve sees him and she says like what have they done to you, my son and my Lord? Like they bruised you,
right.
they scourged you. what happened? And I think this is a healthier, and that's the kind of the way that the church likes to look at atonement. It's not just this victorious superhero coming down and destroying everything. It's the wounded Christ.
Right.
Our victory is through the sacrifice. And so I didn't want to lose the sacrifice too much. Didn't want the comic book medium to kind of it's funny, there are parallel stories in Superman where he's almost, dying and dead and such, and through his death he goes near the sun, gets empowered, but it's not that. It's victory through brokenness, victory through sacrifice, and through his death. And so I wanted to keep a little bit of that. And I'm actually starting the process of working on a deluxe, whatever it is, version of the graphic novel, where I take the redone script for the audio drama and kind of bolster the original graphic novel and reprint it, do volume printing instead, because right now it's print on demand, which as a self-published author, it's the way to make it available cheaply. Right. But you'll see that the ink is faded, the paper isn't great. It's
not the same quality.
Exactly.
Right.
So I want to give that book new life, but also take that redone script, and it's actually very different than like if you listen to the audio drama, it's a very different script than the graphic novel, and I want to bring that back to the graphic novel and make sure I believe it's a stronger story. So
did that take you longer to kind of put together in terms of script and planning? And
no, I most of my projects take years to think about, and then I put immense pressure on myself, on my family, and everyone around me, and just get it done in several months. It's the way that I work. I work really well under pressure, and almost not at all without the pressure. And so this is usually how it happens. It's thinking Easter, and then being Easter is 6 weeks away. I need to reach out to voice actors, that kind of thing.
And then finally, a few days or a few weeks, and then everything starts action.
Yep.
Right. The illustration that you have, if you were to say how much of it is from extra biblical sources, like you mentioned the Gospel of Nicodemus. What kind of elements did you choose to include, and how did you make that choice?
So at the end of the book, there's a page with all the references.
Yeah,
I would go to say almost 80% of every word in that book is sourced from a patristic source, which is really impressive given that sometimes it sounds so casual and conversational. That's San Ephraim. And I love that. I feel like younger me would have loved that. I wasn't one to sit down and read the manuscripts and read the poetry of San Ephraim. I would have just read the comic book and loved it and consumed it. And to think that
making the father's conversational is definitely a plus.
Exactly. And you would have no idea. And even near the end, it's in the narration it says Christ became the first fruit, and he became the door with. So these are the words of Saint Cyril. You're reading a comic book, it's fitting, it's flowing, and it's the words of Saint Cyril. And I think I would have loved to give younger me that gift of having access to these manuscripts in a way that engaged me, because I've always loved stories. I would have loved to have something like this that let me into the wealth of the fathers without the challenge of having to read something that was written for an audience in like hundreds of years ago.
Right, in a way that you're not accustomed to, you're not used to, trained in a different way of thinking, and that's beautiful. And how did you structure that composition to the actual illustrations?
I'm very visual, and I'm very obsessive, and so when there's a story, I usually watch it or continue experiencing it for a long time before I put pen to paper. And so it's the same. I've watched the film of Saint Moses the Strong in my head for years. Same with Anastasis. It's just I kind of do the research and start piecing it together in my mind in the way that I want to watch it in an exciting way. And then I do start with the script. With St. John the Short, I actually started drawing right away. I feel like that was my inexperience at the time. Whereas I was writing and drawing the pages as they're going. And that
St. John?
Yeah, St. John. And I had to go back and do a lot of rework because it didn't fit. Right now, my process is to start with story. And story is easy to learn. Like there are rules of story where
Storytelling.
and it's the same thing in visuals where contrast is really important. That's why you were gravitating towards the image of Saint Anthony in the middle, because he's contrasting with everything else. There's a bit of space between him and everything else. Same thing with the audio drama, same thing with the graphic novel. I try to, if I put a big paragraph and it's a bit of a heavier thing, I try to contrast it with like a action or a lighter sentence right after to kind of give it room to breathe. So that's how I kind of figure out pacing and such. And then it's the same process of editing over and over again, trying to just like putting on different hats. It's funny because there's a way of teaching it in art where you literally make different eyeglasses and title them differently to be like composition glasses. And actually to teach yourself, you put on the different glasses and look at your work from that different perspective and that perspective only, like not to get lost in all the different applications. And so that's what I did to say, okay, well, is your theme coming through? Is your, what about the emotion?
Yes.
A lot of things I adjusted came from that place of thinking, you started the story with Isaiah and you have King David coming here, and then you end it with Christ coming down, and that's it. Where is the rest of their story? You need to finish their arcs. And so a lot of that stuff I came back and redid it from that angle of, okay, let's edit it with that in mind, this in mind. And then if it's in a visual format, that's when I start sketching little thumbnails, and then from that I start drawing the bigger pieces and getting it done that way.
Wow, that's beautiful. I respect how much effort you put into making sure that the way you're telling this, you're not being carried away. Like, you're very careful illustrator, you're a very careful storyteller. Like, you take your work with a lot of responsibility, that this is something that's going to influence the thinking and the faith of someone who's going to read this, and I want to make sure I'm on the right track, cross my T's and dot my I's and make sure that what I'm saying fits.
There's so much room for error with this stuff.
It is, especially with such an illustrative or interpretive medium, right? Like, it's a lot of it is with the reader.
Yep.
Right.
The second you're done, the piece
out of your hand.
Piece of work is not even yours. It's the reader's.
You have very little control, if any, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, you're in the same kind of ballpark as the iconographer, because you produce something, you make something, and then you step back, and it's the person, the worshiper, who approaches the icon, and the icon is used in prayer, in worship. It's used along with other icons. It's used along, with the hymns. It's like it has its place in the liturgical space, right? And I think that digital illustration, it's got so much potential. It's able to step in all of these different places, right?
It's accessible. It's easily
very accessible, right? Like, someone can pick this up who is not theologically trained, who's not very familiar with the stories of the saints, of the background, with the tradition, and be able to pick up like 80-90% of what you're trying to say in a way you want it to be told, right? Or understood. And that's why it's such a powerful media. And I know of another digital illustrator. His name is Mina Antone, I believe. But his work and his style, very unique and definitely different than yours. And he also combines elements. But I feel like the storytelling approach that where you come from, what you bring, is something that has all this potential. And I'm looking forward to more work from you and to see what else your mind produces. And I remember every week I would have to go to like the newsstand in Alexandria and just pick up the latest comic book. Like, it's not even like a question of like, to me it was more important than food.
Yeah.
Like, my parents would tell me like, would you rather have this or food? I'm like, no, this, right? And the reason this was the case is because I was able to connect with it, and I was able to the ideas that it portrayed, it made sense to me.
Yep.
Right? even though, I didn't know who the illustrator was, I didn't know who the storyteller was, I didn't know anything about the storyteller, but it's such a powerful medium that it was so effective, and I had to have it. Today, we have a lot more offerings. We have, a lot of digital stuff out there, a lot of, like you mentioned before, a lot of noise.
Mm-hmm.
And with something like this coming along, kind of like a voice in the wilderness, and just there's all this stuff coming along and all this stuff happening and all these things bombarding us and our children and our youth. What I want to see is more of this kind of presence of these kind of stories on our bookshelves,
Mm-hmm.
in our homes, in our bookstores, because where you might have, kind of like an obstacle reading Saint Cyril, this is very accessible. This makes it so that anyone from anywhere can pick it up and just understand what's being said, what they're trying to say. And on that note, I really want to thank you for your time, and I want to encourage everyone, if you are interested in following Michael's work, it's creativeorthodox.com. Pick up a copy for yourself. It's available on Amazon, and be on the lookout for his upcoming works. Be following your work with great interest, and I've been following it for a while, and please keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for the encouragement, Abuna, and thank you so much for having me. I guess an extension of that is, if you draw, if you write, if you make music, then go and draw and write and make music. You don't need to be good at it. It's if you have these stories, if you're raised on these stories, if you find these stories, we need people to tell them in the faith. Without Saint Athanasius sitting down to write, without Zacharias sitting down to write the story, without the iconographers in the caves sitting down to draw these drawings that they were almost sure no one is going to see, we wouldn't have had these stories. And so if you're anywhere close to that creative realm and the realm of storytelling, pick up the pen or go to your computer, any means necessary, start telling these stories, because that's the way that our church has lived, and that's the way that the Spirit talks to us, and that's the way that we pass down the faith.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. For questions, comments, feedback, or if you'd like to make a suggestion on a topic for a future episode, please feel free to reach out to the email in the bio. And don't forget to subscribe to get a notification when new episodes drop. God bless you, and have a great day.